I don't know if there is any student in this world that has never ever experienced fear and panic because of examination before. So there's even this common statement I used to hear around, that is examination fever. Examination fever, because some people fear so much just because they are preparing for exam. But sadly, that panic that we experience before examination is one of the reasons why most students feel even before the examination begins. Interestingly, this idea is captured in the scriptures. The book of Deuteronomy chapter 20 verse 8. Before the Israelites went into war, before they went into any battle, the commander would come, the commander of the army would come and give this important announcement. He normally says that whoever is fearful, or who is fearful and faint-hearted. So he asks that question, who is fearful and faint-hearted? He should do what? Return to his house, so that he may not cause his brothers to lose heart as he has. So the question is, why was this announcement so important? The reason is simple. Fear alone could cripple the remaining army. Because of that fear, other soldiers may be scared. So their fear alone could cause them to lose even before the battle begins. And examination works in a similar way. Many students lose confidence long before even they see the exam questions. Some people have a very weak spot in mathematics especially. So what is the subject that gives you the most fear and panic? What subject is that? Is it chemistry, physics, biology, or mathematics? So that fear alone could cause you to fail. So in this video, we'll be looking at some clear and deliberate strategies that can help us to ace our exam, especially mathematics. Why is clear and deliberate strategy very, very important? Because purposeful effort always beats aimless effort. And this is captured clearly in this first book of Corinthians chapter 9 verse 26, where it says in part that the way I am running is not aimlessly, and the way I am aiming my blows is so as not to be striking the air. So the same principle applies when it comes to exam preparations. You can't just be throwing your blows anyhow. Your time, you can't just be using it against aimless effort. But if you have strategies, then your efforts will not be aimless. So we'll be looking at exactly how to do that. So what is the first step? Step number 1, understand the exam first. Before studying even a single topic, if I were preparing for my maths or any subject that I find quite difficult, the first thing I would do is to try my best to understand how the exam actually works. This is so important. And sadly, this is where most students fail. They just jump straight in and they start studying or learning topics without first understanding the exam itself. So what are some of the things we first need to understand even before we start studying our first topic? We need to understand the exam format. The exam you are preparing for, what is the format of the exam? And the number of questions that normally come. And what topics are the topics that are mostly examined on? And what is the mark distribution? These questions are so important. For example, if you are taking an exam in science, are there compulsory questions? And those compulsory questions, what are the topics? Apart from maybe a physics, chemistry, biology, and agric. So you need to understand the format and which kind of questions carry the most marks. If you understand the exam format very well, then maybe you have a clear chance of acing your exam because your effort now becomes purposeful. But how can we do that? We should look at the syllabus. The exam you are preparing for, the syllabus, and also consider past exam papers. This is very important because success begins with understanding. The book of Proverbs chapter 24 verse 3 says in part that through wisdom a house is built, and by understanding it is established. And even Jesus illustrated this very well. One of the greatest teachers that ever lived, Jesus Christ, illustrated this principle in Luke chapter 14 verse 28 when he says, which of you intending to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost. So preparation is so important. You should know how much you have before you go right in. So preparation always begins with knowing what you are preparing for. And that is one of the first things needed for success in your exams. What is the second step we need to take? That is to study the syllabus like a map. So once I understand the exam, the next step I will take is to actually try to study the syllabus like a map. Imagine this. Imagine traveling to a place where you have never been before. I'm sure you will not just start moving randomly. You don't know the place and you start moving randomly. I'm sure you're not going to do that. But rather, the first thing you will do is to look at the map. You will look at the map to know exactly the location of where you are going to and the path to take. That will make it easier to get to your destination. And examination works the same way. The syllabus works like the map or the way we have to, or the destination we have to get to. So it tells us, or it tells you everything you need to know, what the examiner expects of you, the topics. So if you take your syllabus, it lists all the topics. So if I were the one preparing for exam in physics, mathematics, or any subject at all, I'll take the syllabus, look at the list of all the topics that needs to be covered in that subject. And then I will highlight the one I already understand. After highlighting the one I already understand, then the ones that will be left are the ones that I struggle with. Then I can now focus my attention on the one that I have issues with. And this preparation becomes focused, but not what? Scattered. And this idea is echoed in the wisdom found in Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 2, which says in part that, write down the vision and inscribe it clearly on tablets, so that the one reading aloud it may do so easily. So you list down the topics, you write them down, so that when you are looking at them, it becomes easier for you to track your progress. So that creates clear direction. What is the third step that can help us to prepare for exams that we kind of like struggle with? It is to use past questions aggressively. That is a very, very powerful examination tool. Past questions. The issue is, if you were serious about passing your exam, or if I am serious about passing my exam, what I will do is I'll take my time to look at the past 10 years, at least the past 10 years before I am writing. What are the questions that my predecessors have written in the past? So I'll take those questions, analyze them carefully, start solving them. And one interesting thing that happens is that immediately you start doing that, some pattern begins to emerge. You start seeing some pattern. You begin to see common topics that normally appear frequently. And you also begin to see familiar question styles, the style of questioning. And you tend to see repeating structures. That is what solving past questions helps you to do, or enlightens you on. And sadly, immediately you're able to do that, the examination starts feeling mysterious. It doesn't feel mysterious again. And this idea is reflected very well in the book of Job, Job chapter 8, verse 8. It states something so unique out there. Job 8, verse 8 says that, ask the former generation and find out what their ancestors learned. So you see, so check the past questions and look at what your ancestors learned. That is your predecessors. What did they learn? And that will help you know what to prepare on. And even the book of Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9 reminds us that there is nothing new under the sun. There's nothing new. So even the questions that you'll be answering as though it is new to you, something of that sort has appeared before. So using past questions aggressively is so important. So the same principle applies when it comes to examinations. What is the fourth step? The fourth step is to focus on high probability topics. Focus on high probability topics. That is very, very important. One fundamental truth you have to keep in mind is, although there are lists of topics in the syllabus, Not all of them appear equally. Some topics appear more frequently than others. So if I am preparing for exam and my exam is approaching, I will prioritize this kind of topics, the topics that appear frequently in past questions, and the topics that carry the most marks. For example, if you are preparing for chemistry, if you are a WASI student preparing for chemistry, you would realize that organic chemistry almost always comes in the final exam and it carries a lot of marks. What about if you are preparing for biology? You would realize that genetics occurs so many times in the final year exam and carries a lot of marks. So analyzing and identifying these patterns will go a long way to helping you. And the advantage is going to be this: you are going to use your time wisely because you know the topics that are frequent in your exam. And as Ephesians 5 verse 15 to 16 says, that we should be careful how we live, making the best use of your time. So this principle helps us to multiply our efforts because we are making the best use of our time, studying high probability topics. Step number 5 is to practice every day. That is something that is very unavoidable, especially for calculation subjects like mathematics and physics. You cannot master it simply by reading. You must solve the problem yourself. And that is a simple rule that many students fail at. So every day, solve a math question, solve a physics question. If it is even 5 to 10 questions a day, try to do that. And because of this consistency, if you try to solve questions every day, it tends to build your speed, your accuracy, and your confidence in the upcoming exams. And as the book of Proverbs chapter 22 verse 29 says, do you see someone skilled in their works? They will stand before kings. Someone who's skilled in their works. But how is skill built? Practice. Hebrews 5 verse 14 has one important aspect that I find quite interesting. It says in part, but solid food belongs to mature people, to those who through use have had their powers of discernment trained to distinguish both right and wrong. So we need to train our power of discernment in order to distinguish between right and wrong. So the same principle applies when it comes to exam. The more we practice, we train ourselves and become skilled at knowing what is the right way of solving a particular question. So this principle is quite interesting. Is that not so? Good. Step number 6, learn from mistake. That is an important thing to take note of. When we practice, we should try our best to learn from our mistakes because mistakes happen to be valuable teachers. Some students, whilst preparing for their exams, make mistakes and then ignore it. Then they move more on without learning anything from it. But if I were the one preparing for exams like this kind of calculation kind of exam, if I got a question wrong, this is what I would do. First, I'll write down the mistake that I made and then understand what went wrong. So I solved a particular question and I made a mistake. I will identify what went wrong. And then I'll look for similar practice questions and solve them again. I'll repeat it until I do not make similar mistakes again. Because this fact is simple. Growth comes from correction. As the book of Proverbs 9 verse 9 says that, instruct the wise and they will become what? Wiser. So the wise one makes a mistake. You instruct him and he becomes wiser. The student preparing for exam, he makes a mistake, corrects those mistakes, and then becomes wiser in the exam. So mistakes can become stepping stones towards improvement. So they are so important. Take note of them and correct them. Step number 7 is to strengthen the foundation. So many students struggle with mathematics and other calculation subjects simply because their foundations are weak. So if I were preparing for this kind of exam, I would notice the gaps in areas that I struggle with. For example, suppose I struggle with algebra, fractions, indices, trigonometry. I would go back and strengthen those basics, because a strong foundation makes difficult questions seem easier. If you do not have a good foundation, it will make you struggle in other complex topics. And this principle is beautifully illustrated in Matthew chapter 7, verse 24 to 25, which says that a wise man who built his house upon the rock. So there is a wise man. Jesus Christ was making an illustration, and he compared the wise man to someone who builds his house upon a rock. When you build a house upon a rock, your foundation becomes strong. And what happens? The wind comes, the storms come. That house can stand firm. When your foundation is strong, no matter the topic that comes, no matter the questions that come, because your foundation is strong, the storms of questions will not make you fail your exam. And then what will I do next? I will simulate the exam. As exam approaches, preparing should take on a different form. It should look like a real exam. So what should you do during or before your exam? You should practice solving full pass questions under timed conditions. What does that mean? Pick a full set of questions, multiple choice, and the AC part, a full set. Set a timer. Is the question requiring to solve everything in 2 hours, 15 minutes? Set a timer of 2 hours, 50 minutes. And then stick to the time. And then avoid distractions. So I'll set timer, solve the entire paper. And if I don't understand something, I will not pause the question to check it up in the textbook, because in the real exam settings, you will not have the chance to do that. After I do that for some time, exam pressure or examination fever actually become less. And this idea of preparation through training appears in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 7. And it says in part, train yourself with godly devotion as your aim. So your aim is to pass your exam. So train yourself with passing your examination as your aim. So success often comes from training before the real moment arrives, but not just sitting idle. And when you do that, when the real moment arrives, what will happen? You'll panic so much. What will be the final thing I will do in preparation for my final year exam? Well, I'll make sure that as the exam arrives and then it is time for the exam, I will manage my time in the exam wisely. My rule will be simple. As I start the exam, I will try my best to answer questions that I understand the best. Yes, questions that I understand the best. Why is that so important? Because it will help me to secure easy marks, cool chop. It will also help me to build confidence, and to also help me to manage my time wisely. So easy marks will be grabbed. It will build my confidence to try much more difficult questions, and then my time will be managed. Because good planning in exam leads to better outcomes. And this idea appears in Proverbs 21, verse 5. It reminds us of this important thing, that the plans of the diligent surely leads to success. So in the exam, if you are diligent and have a plan, you will surely succeed in your exam. So what is my final advice to you? You see, passing exam or math exam is really about intelligence alone. And most often, it comes down to strategy, discipline, and consistent practice. So when these things come together, even students who have struggled with math can perform far better than they expected. So I hope that your upcoming exam, no matter the exam you are preparing for, may you come out with flying colors. And I know if you follow these steps and you apply them in other subjects you find difficult to pass, I'm sure your story this time around will be different. And that examination fever, you will never ever experience it. If you find these tips helpful, and these suggestions may be quite helpful, consider giving the video a like, give it a thumbs up, and comment which subjects do you find quite difficult or panic a lot when it is time for exams. See you in our next tips or examination tips.